Welcome to Chris Horner's Corner. I'm Chris Horner. In today's episode, I want to talk about a little bit more than a dip in form. Okay, if you've been watching the 25 season, the early 25 season with Remco Evenepoel, where he came back after his accident with the male truck driver in December, we saw him come back, of course, at Brabantse. We saw him win there. We saw him go into Amstel Gold, chase down Tadej Pogacar, get third at Amstel Gold. Then we saw him start to blow up and show signs of a dip in form at Flèche Wallonne, where he couldn't follow Tadej Pogacar. That won there, went over to Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and then Remco Evenepoel had more than a dip in form. So here on Chris Horner's Corner, I want to cover what's a little bit more than a dip on form. Remco Evenepoel called it a dip. It was a catastrophic explosion. Guys, everyone expected Remco Evenepoel to be able to follow Tadej Pogacar at Liège-Bastogne-Liège this year in 2025, and he couldn't follow the Slovenian, and he couldn't follow the next 10, 15 riders behind that. And then by the last and final climb at Liège-Bastogne-Liège, he dropped off, pulled anchor, and decided that was it for Liège-Bastogne-Liège and pulled up. Now, they went on to go do and start Tour of Romandy. If you watch Peacock, you would have heard Christian Vande Velde say that he expects that Remco Evenepoel was going to dominate Tour of Romandy. But of course, we saw him fall down that dip in form at Liège-Bastogne-Liège and at Flèche Wallonne. And then he gets over to Romandy, and by stage 2, he said he was feeling good and he was coming out of the dip, but yet he didn't win stage 2, and 5 riders went up the road, but he did win the sprint for 6. But 6th is after he was sitting on for 20 kilometers and then won the sprint for 6. That has no time bonuses, so no one cared about 6. We go into stage 3. Jay Vine there at Tour of Romandy, he ends up winning the uphill finish. Then we go into the mountain stage there at Tour of Romandy, and Remco Evenepoel blows up and loses about a minute and a half. That's more than a dip in form. If I take you into Liège-Bastogne-Liège, a dip in form is you're following Tadej Pogacar, he takes off, drops you, and you start to drop a little bit more time than everyone would have expected. But we wouldn't have been surprised if Remco Evenepoel had stayed with Tadej Pogacar after Amstel Gold chasing him down. We wouldn't have been surprised at Liège-Bastogne-Liège if he had stayed with Tadej Pogacar and dropped him and then went solo. We're a little bit surprised, of course, but not a ton, right? It could have happened. You wouldn't have been unbelievable sitting on the Chesterfield thinking this can't be happening. We saw him win already Liège-Bastogne-Liège 2 times, Remco Evenepoel. So if he soloed 2 times to win Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and now he's getting dropped and stopping on the final climb, that's an explosion. Okay, so dips in form are just a little bit lack of, normally it could be calories, it could be you went too hard the day before, or 2 days in a row, you went a little bit too hard, you had a dip in form, it dropped off a little bit. Now, if I compare my top 6 riders on the first page, and I'm talking Tadej Pogacar's had explosions. We only have to go into the 23 Tour de France to know that on stage 17, that was an explosion on stage 17 from Tadej Pogacar. If we go into Primož Roglič, who I have number 2, and we go into the 2020 Tour de France, where he lost on the penultimate day in the individual time trial to Tadej Pogacar, that's an explosion. If we go to Jonas Vingegaard, if I'm talking the top 6 riders on page 1, Jonas Vingegaard is probably the one rider that has not had an unexpected explosion day throughout all the time that I have been covering him on the Butterfly Effect Beyond the Coverage, and of course here at Chris Horner's Corner. So Jonas Vingegaard has been the most steady of all 6 riders. And I could take you into last year's 2024 Tour de France when I believe it was stage 16, stage 17, where he dropped a little bit to Remco Evenepoel and got worried that his form might have been dropping, but then came back better for the last 2 mountain stages at Paris-Nice. At Tour de France. Not as good as Tadej Pogacar. They were racing in Nice, not racing at Paris-Nice. But he got a little bit better. His legs came back, and all of a sudden he was above Remco Evenepoel again at the Tour de France. But that one stage, he did dip a little bit behind Remco Evenepoel, just a tad, and that's a dip. That's not an explosion. But for Jonas Vingegaard, he's been very steady throughout his career, and there hasn't been big explosions. If we go into Remco Evenepoel, of course, I've covered it already here at the beginning part where we have that the Brabantse and we have Amstel Gold where he's great, fell apart at Flèche, fell apart at Liège-Bastogne-Liège. This dramatically fell apart at Tour of Romandy. And if you're watching this and you go, Chris, He won the individual time trial on the last day. He recovered from that. That is not a recovery. That is a 17.1 kilometer time trial. That did not impress me. That's what he was expected to do. And if you looked at his times, and I bet if you looked at his power meter, there would be a big difference between his best form in the individual time trial and what we saw on stage 5. But remember, if there isn't, it's a 17-kilometer time trial. It's not long enough after a day that he already got dropped the day before. So he hasn't recovered in time. Now, if I go into some of the classic guys like Wout van Aert, we've seen Wout van Aert struggle and have explosion days many times throughout his career. And if I take you into the 21 Tour de France, where he started after having an operation, he was undertrained at that Tour de France when he was having, if I recall right, his appendix done. And he came into the Tour de France a little bit undertrained, but started getting better and better throughout the Tour de France. And then, of course, won the individual time trial at the end of 3 weeks and on the Champs. So there is an ideal scenario where you see Wout van Aert, where he was undertrained but kept getting better and better throughout the Tour de France, and you could see that happening. Now, if I go into Mathieu van der Poel, I could take you into the year when he did the Giro d'Italia and then tried to back it up with the Tour de France. That might be an example of where he was over-raced, or if you want to use the word overtrained. Racing and training, it's still kind of the same thing in terms of the fatigue on the body, but the racing is always going to be a bit more extreme. But in order to know for sure if he was over-raced or overtrained before he started the Tour de France and dropped out after doing the Giro, we'd have to look at his calendar of his training in between the Giro and the Tour de France. Let's say he finished the Giro and then he got too much rest before he started the Tour de France and he just couldn't get the body restarted. So why am I bringing this up? Well, I gave you already 6 examples of first-page riders that have dips in the form. 6 that have dips, 5 that have had explosions, because Jonas Vingegaard hasn't exploded in my eyes, unless, of course, you're talking about just coming into a race unfit after he comes back racing. But in general, Jonas Vingegaard is the most steady. Now, the reason I bring this up, and I saw a ton of comments that were all over the place. Undertrained and overtrained is the biggest thing that everyone wants to use as an example to what happened to Remco Evenepoel. Okay, as you guys should know by now, I was a pro for 25 years. Throughout my career, I had it happen many times. It's always going to happen. It's easy to do because it's not being overtrained or undertrained that's normally the problem. Undertrained, you come in, you don't have good form. Overtrained is almost impossible to do. Like, you have to be crazy overtrained as a professional to come into a race and blow up. Because if you're overtrained, that means you did 800, 1,000 miles a week, multiple weeks in a row. That could be overtrained, but pro riders don't train that way. They're trained 400 to 600, and sometimes I do some 700-mile-a-week training back to back to back, and I always got better. So when you look at Remco Evenepoel here at the 25 season, I can guarantee you that he came into Brabantse completely ready to go and look sharp, and he should have gotten better and better. So what happened to him? Well, that's the point of the video here, is it's not overtrained or undertrained. There's something else that has happened. If I give you an example, when we go into 2014, when I was with Lampre, I got hit in the tunnel. I punctured my lung, severely punctured my lung, and then went into the Tour de France after puncturing my lung in April, and then had a severe cough from the Tour de France that lasted for 6 months. It was unbelievably difficult to live with, and then once I stopped training in the wintertime, the cough went away. But once I came back to racing domestically in the U.S., here with Airgas in 2015, what happened is that cough started to come back all the time. And it has came back every day of my hard training that I've done since 2014, basically. 2015, it was coming back every time I put in more training. It was basically like an autoimmune disease. The doctors have yet to ever be able to solve the problem that I had. I believe it was from the tunnel, the crash in 2014. But whatever it is, the more I train, the more the lungs produce mucus, and the more I have a cough that becomes more infectious and more stronger, and it's causing me to be able to not recover properly after doing hard training. But when I was a pro, I could not overtrain. It never happened. If I did 600 miles a week, back to back, 3, 4, 5 weeks in a row, 700-mile-a-week trainings matched in there too, I had no problem as long as, of course, all your time off the bike is spent recovering properly. You're not out at the disco club. You're not out mowing your lawn. You're not washing your car. You're not detailing your car. You're not hanging out with your lady friends or your wife or something like that and doing big time parties and extravaganzas where you just got done doing 100 miles or 130 miles that day and then you went out and started mowing the lawn or partying all night. I was never a partier. So what I found in my experience as a professional cyclist, the more I trained back to back, the better I became. Now, how could you become overtrained? Well, you could be overtrained if you went 5 months of doing it. If you went so far that mentally it starts having an effect on you. So if your mind is a little bit different than my mind, and everybody's different, what I'm feeling is not exactly what everyone else is feeling, and maybe you're a person that doesn't have the natural ability to ride the bike and recover from big training days like I did. That's always a possibility. But if you're not the person that can stay relaxed on your couch after doing 100 to 130 mile rides for multiple days during a 7-day period, then you're not going to recover properly. Now, I think Remco Evenepoel has already proved in the last 4 and 5 seasons of his professional career that he can handle big blocks of training and then come into a race that's at the early part of the season, like we saw at Brabantse, win there and continue his form coming up. So when we see the dip in form that was an explosion from Remco Evenepoel, this has to be caused by something else that's not related to your training, your rest and recovery. It has to be caused by some kind of stress issue that's putting on the body. With me, it was my lung issue in 2014 that actually caused me to have to stop racing my bike. I hate to use the word retired because if they solve the lungs, I'd like to come back and race my bike at 53 years old. But it did stop me from racing my bike because the harder I trained, the worse it got, as I already explained, and I couldn't recover, I couldn't diet properly. And at times when I was on medication, antibiotic medications for my lung, then you're dealing with fighting the antibiotics that no one could tell you beforehand when I was taking the antibiotics that, hey, don't go out and try to do a 6-hour training ride or this is going to mess you up. At one moment I was out with antibiotics, the first time trying a strong set of antibiotics to try to clear my lungs up. And I got out there 2 hours into it and completely blew up and had to hobble my way back home for the next hour of ride until I can finally get off my bike. And I was devastated. And that was from antibiotics. So again, when we start looking at the top riders like Remco Evenepoel, and I'm not trying to be hard on Remco Evenepoel like I've seen one of the comments where he said, well, if Remco Evenepoel wasn't so unexpectedly good, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Of course we wouldn't be having this conversation because we wouldn't have seen the explosion or the dip in form from Remco Evenepoel. But what my channel is here to do is to help riders, and especially at this moment, Remco Evenepoel, understand what he's going through and what he has to do to change it. So if we believe my theory of 25 years experiences and my experiences of blowing up throughout different points and times throughout my career, because I can bring you in to the 2012 Tour of California after I won in 2011. I started it in 2012 as the big time favorite. And then I got into the individual time trial that morning in Bakersfield, California, where it was 97, 100 degrees out. The cars got split up and lost as they were looking for some of our other teammates out on the time trial course when we were previewing it in the morning. And we're sitting out in 100-degree weather without bottles on our bike because we have used them all up when we were out training. And then, of course, later in that afternoon, I had a disastrous individual time trial that cost me any chance of repeating at Tour of California. So that is another way you can blow up. But to be clear, I'm not trying to be hard on Remco Evenepoel. So what I'm trying to do is explain that if you have the talent of a top-level pro like Remco Evenepoel, it is almost impossible to be overtrained. If he takes his experience from years past and has matched that and matched it with the rest and recovery, he cannot be overtrained starting the 25 season. He's most likely not undertrained or he wouldn't have won Brabantse like he did. And then, of course, Tadej Pogačar at Amstel Gold. So again, it has to be something else externally away from the factors that Remco Evenepoel can handle and what he would expect. In my time, what it was, the heat there, of course, at Tour of California in 2012 was a problem. Later, when I had the infection, it was the medication that was taken from antibiotics. And if you look at Remco Evenepoel before, right around the time of Liège-Bastogne-Liège, he has a cut on his lip here, so maybe he was taking some medication for that, and that might have been what caused the problems and drop in form, that now his body is fighting the medication or the infection or the viral infection that he had, and that caused the explosion or dip in form that Remco Evenepoel called it. Yes, I'm being a little bit hard with his comments, but if you're going to call it a dip in form when normally you're up the road and dropping the whole peloton at Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and instead the whole peloton's dropping you, it is an explosion, no doubt, especially when you go into Tour of Romandy and you can't stay with the climbers there at Tour of Romandy on the mountain stage there. So when you're thinking about your training and your training has gone spot on year to year to year, and you see your form come up like it did at the Brabantse for Remco Evenepoel, you know it has to be something else internally. You have to ask yourself if your calendar looks like it normally does and you arrive good, if your calories have been good throughout that period and throughout the race. Because again, if we go into the Tour de France with Tadej Pogacar and I take you into the 22 Tour de France with Tadej Pogacar on stage 11, the most magnificent bike racing stage I've seen, up Col de Granon, Tadej Pogacar was just bonking, and that was a lack of calories. It wasn't a lack of form. It wasn't overtrained. He wasn't undertrained. He wasn't sick. He didn't have an illness in his body. He wasn't fighting an infection. He just needed one Coke and one Snickers, and he would have still been wearing the yellow jersey at the end of the climb on Col de Granon of stage 11 of the 22 Tour de France. So this video is to help you understand that when you keep your diary in order, when you have your training in order, when you have your rest and recovery in order, when your diet during your training period is correct, and your diet, especially the amount of calories you have in a bike race, is correct, the next thing you have to look for is, tactically, did I waste energy somewhere? If you can answer that and say that Remco Evenepoel, for this example, tactically raced fine, he was out of the wind, he wasn't doing anything crazy at Liège-Bastogne-Liège, so he clicked off the most basics of check marks throughout his diary to know that he did everything correct. If all that is correct, guys, 100%, no doubt about it, and I will go down and bet my house on it, that it has to be something else of an infection, some kind of medication that you are taking for the infection to fight that. It has to be an external factor. You could have some stress on the body or some mental stress that's causing you some issues. Maybe you have complications at home that's putting extra pressure on you. That could cause it. But there always has to be an outside explanation. If you can check off the most simple, I've done the training, I have the rest, I have the diet, tactically I've been out of the wind, I've been in perfect position throughout the whole race, but yet I still blew up. If you still blew up, but you can check off the most basic factors first, it's an external factor, and then you're going to have to look a little bit deeper because it becomes very complicated for a rider like Remco Evenepoel that blew up during Flèche Wallonne, Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and Tour of Romandy, so he has to go deeper and figure out what it is. Now, if you can't figure out what it is, for sure the option needs to be at that moment, as I already explained during the butterfly effect and beyond the coverage, you have to take rest on the bike. If your body is fighting the performance factor that normally it agrees with and it thrives on, you'd have to take rest and time off the bike, and that's why I was stressing it so much that Remco Evenepoel needs at least 3 days rest followed by a week of easier riding in order to make sure he can start bringing his level back up, because Dauphiné starts really soon, about 5 weeks time. So if you take 1 week to 10 days easy, now all of a sudden you're down to 3.5, 4 weeks total before you get into Dauphiné, because remember, the last half a week, you're not going to do big training in the Dauphiné the last 2 or 3 days. So now we're looking at 4 weeks of Dauphiné, and then he has 10 days after Dauphiné to get ready for the Tour de France, thereabouts. So like and subscribe. I'll see you guys on the next video at some point in time for Chris Horner's Corner. But keep in mind, a dip in form is a small drop. An explosion is a massive drop, and that's what we saw from Remco Evenepoel. So like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys for the next videos real soon.